There's a house for sale in McDowell County, West Virginia. 3 bedrooms, over 1,200 square feet. The asking price is $7,000. Not $70,000, not $700,000, $7,000. That is less than most people spend on a used car. It is less than some people spend on a vacation. And it is sitting in the same country where the national median home price just crossed $420,000. That gap is not a typo. It is not a distressed auction with 17 liens and a toxic waste problem buried in the fine print. Although yes, there are catches, and we will get to every single one of them honestly. That gap exists because of a very specific 100-year sequence of events that played out across the mountains of southern West Virginia. And once you understand what actually happened here, the prices stop feeling illegal and start feeling inevitable. This video covers 10 towns, some barely surviving, some already gone, one with a population of 5 people, where that sequence bottomed out into some of the most unbelievable real estate in America. We are going to cover what these places actually look like today, what it would realistically cost and feel like to live in one, and why a quiet wave of retirees, remote workers, and homesteaders has started paying attention again. Some of these towns are genuine opportunities, some are cautionary tales, a few are both at the same time. Here are 10 West Virginia ghost towns where home prices are so low, it feels illegal. Thurmond. At its peak, Thurmond was not a quiet mountain village. 15 passenger trains stopped here every single day. The local depot processed nearly 95,000 passengers in a single year. The banks in this town handled the financial flows of the entire region's coal industry, which in the early 1900s was some of the most lucrative extractive business in the country. Today, Thurmond has 5 permanent residents. The reason Thurmond collapsed is worth understanding because it is not the reason most people assume. The coal did not run out, the mines did not close. Thurmond died because of diesel. When locomotive technology shifted from steam to diesel engines, the entire strategic logic of Thurmond's location evaporated overnight. Steam engines needed water and coal replenishment at regular intervals. Thurmond, sitting along the New River with direct C&O railroad access, was perfectly positioned to provide exactly that. Diesel engines needed neither. The town did not lose its coal, it lost its purpose. The National Park Service now owns and maintains much of Thurmond as part of New River Gorge National Park. That federal status has essentially frozen the town in place, which is both the reason it still looks the way it does, and the reason you cannot simply buy a house there. Properties inside the historic district are off the market, but the surrounding area, Oak Hill, Beaver, Beckley, sits within that same zip code corridor, and the park's presence has created something that most of the towns on this list completely lack. A reason for people to show up. Whitewater rafters, hikers, history tourists. That demand creates a modest price floor. A single family home in Beckley lists around $49,900. Oak Hill, closer to $79,000. These are still extraordinary by any national comparison, but they are higher than what you will find deeper in the coal fields because the park gives the region an economic identity beyond mining. Thurmond itself remains a ghost town in every meaningful sense, but it is a ghost town with a federal caretaker and a national park as its neighbor, which makes the surrounding land a different kind of conversation than what is coming next. COALWOOD. COALWOOD had something most of these towns never got, a story the whole world heard. Homer Hickam Jr. grew up here during the town's industrial peak. His memoir about building rockets as a teenager in a coal town became a Hollywood film. For years, COALWOOD hosted an annual festival that drew visitors from across the country specifically because of that story. The town had cultural identity, international name recognition, and a genuine tourism hook. None of it was enough. The October Sky Festival stopped running in 2019. Since then, the historical structures that gave the town its character have continued their slow return to the hillside. The Norfolk and Western Railway pulled its tracks in 1959. Coal production officially ended in 1982. By 1990, the population had dropped to 900, and it has kept falling. McDowell County, which once led the entire United States in coal production, now has a median home value sitting around $44,600, and actual unrenovated listings go considerably lower than that. A 3-bedroom house built in 1922, 1,228 square feet, lists at $10,900. What COALWOOD illustrates, and this matters for every town that follows, is that cultural fame without sustained economic reinvestment produces the same outcome as complete obscurity. obscurity. The story was real, the film was real, the festival drew real people. But narrative value does not repair a water main, and it does not bring back a grocery store that closed when the last mining family left. George Lafayette Carter originally designed COALWOOD in 1905 as a model industrial community. Offices, homes, a company store, churches, a schoolhouse, all built to spec on 20,000 purchased acres. What Carter built as a showcase, the decades after mining turned into a slow erasure. For an investor, COALWOOD is a case study in buying with your eyes open. The history is genuine, the price is genuine, the challenges are equally genuine. NUTTALLBURG. Henry Ford leased this mine in the 1920s. He needed coal to feed his automotive steel mills, and NUTTALLBURG sat on a seam that could deliver it. Ford brought his signature industrial systematization to the operation. The coal tipple he constructed on this site still stands today, visible to hikers who make the trip down into the gorge. NUTTALLBURG at its peak had 110 company-owned houses, a post office, a doctor's office, a clubhouse. It also had rigid racial segregation built into its physical layout. Black residents on one side of Short Creek, white residents on the other. A design feature that was standard practice across the coal fields and worth naming because it shaped everything about how these towns functioned and who benefited from them. Coal production stopped in 1958. The National Park Service eventually took the site, and there is no private residential real estate available within NUTTALLBURG's limits today. Like Thurmond, it is preserved rather than inhabited, but NUTTALLBURG earns its place on this list because of something it explains better than anywhere else: the road problem. The access road into NUTTALLBURG is a single-lane winding path that cannot accommodate modern trailers or RVs. This is not a quirk, and it is a structural feature of nearly every town in this region. These communities were built to be accessed by rail, not by road. When the tracks were removed, many of them were never connected to the state road grid at all. They became physically stranded. This matters enormously for anyone looking at sub $10,000 listings in the surrounding area. A house without a deeded traversable road to it is not just inconvenient, it is often unmortgageable, cash only, high risk, and potentially inaccessible. Before any purchase in this region, the first question is not about the house, it is about how you get to the house. KAYMOOR. KAYMOOR extracted over 16 million tons of coal between the early 1900s and 1962. It employed a genuinely diverse workforce: native white workers, black migrants from the South, European immigrants, in an industry that was otherwise deeply stratified. The mine was productive, the community was real, and the site today is one of the most visually dramatic in the entire gorge. To reach it, you descend 821 stairs. There is no road. There is no vehicular access. There never will be. KAYMOOR was built into the wall of the gorge itself, serviced by funicular carts and rail lines that were removed when production ceased. The residential tiers, the places where miners actually lived, were never integrated into any road system because they never needed to be. The company provided transport. When the company left, the transport left with it, and the site became permanently inaccessible by car. 821 stairs is the most concrete illustration of a problem that runs through this entire region's real estate market. The topography that made these coal seams worth mining. The narrow river gorges, the steep hillsides, the isolation from larger population centers, is the exact same topography that makes modern access to the resulting properties genuinely difficult. You are not just buying a cheap house. In many cases, you are buying into an infrastructure situation that the company coal model created and then abandoned entirely. And the infrastructure failure goes beyond roads. In many of these towns, water systems, sewer lines, and electrical connections were originally managed by the coal company directly. When the corporations left, those systems passed to municipal governments that had no revenue base to maintain them. Buyers in this region regularly encounter properties where the municipal water supply requires boiling several times a week, or where the only viable alternative is investing in a private well and septic system, costs that can significantly exceed the purchase price of the house itself. KAYMOOR itself is ruins and hiking trails now, but the lesson it teaches applies directly to the listings you will find in every county south of here. Gary. Gary, West Virginia is named after Judge Elbert H. Gary, one of the founders of U.S. Steel. That tells you everything about the scale of what was built here. This was not a small mining camp. Gary was a complex of 14 individual mining operations, 14 camps functioning together as one of the largest corporate-run municipal entities ever assembled in the United States. The metallurgical coal that came out of these mountains did not just heat homes. It fed the steel mills of Pittsburgh. It built the bridges and railways and skyscrapers of 20th century American infrastructure. When U.S. Steel pulled out in the 1980s, the local economy did not decline gradually. It collapsed. But Gary was incorporated. It had the legal status of a real city, with all the administrative obligations that status carries: roads to maintain, water systems to run, a government to fund, and almost no tax base left to do any of it. The result is some of the most striking listings in the state. A 2-bedroom, 1-bath house on Doberman Drive, $37,000. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath on Grace Lane, $50,000. These are real properties in a real town with real streets. Just streets that now echo a great deal more than they used to. For a retiree or remote worker, Gary offers something the deeper ghost towns cannot. It is still a functioning municipality, which means it has utility connections, an address, a physical road. The challenges are real. Commercial services can be 25 miles away, and the population contraction has left visible gaps in the town's fabric. But Gary has residents who have stayed specifically because they refuse to let it disappear, and that kind of stubbornness creates a very particular community identity that is either deeply appealing or not at all, depending on the person. ITMANN. Every entry on this list so far has been about residential real estate. ITMANN is something else. The ITMANN Company store and office is a classical revival complex built from native sandstone quarried directly from the cliffs across the Guyandata River. Construction ran from 1923 to 1925. The architect was Alexander Mahood. The building served as the economic and social center of the Pocahontas Fuel Company's operations. Post office, doctor's office, barbershop, payroll center, all under one roof, supporting a workforce of 1,800 miners extracting from the Pocahontas No. 3 seam, one of the most prized coal deposits ever mined. The mine closed in the 1980s. The building briefly became a homeless shelter, then it was abandoned entirely. It is currently listed on the National Register of Historic Places and available for purchase at $250,000, including 1.75 acres of land. To build this structure from scratch today, native sandstone, that scale, that craftsmanship, would cost millions. It is listed at $250,000. That number is either an extraordinary opportunity or an extraordinary trap, depending entirely on what a buyer intends to do with it. Here is the catch, and it is not a small one. The property carries a flood risk rating of 9 out of 10. The building has sustained years of vandalism and neglect. Restoring native sandstone construction at this scale is an expensive, specialized undertaking. This is not a property someone buys passively. It is a vision purchase, a boutique hotel, an artist colony, a community anchor. The vision is genuinely compelling. The financial and physical commitment required to execute it is genuinely significant. WIDEN. Most company towns tried to attract workers. WIDEN was built to keep the outside world out. Joseph Gardner Bradley, president of the Elk River Coal and Lumber Company, constructed WIDEN in Clay County with deliberate geographic isolation as a management strategy. The goal was to prevent United Mine Workers organizers from reaching his workforce. For nearly 50 years, that strategy held. The town operated without a major labor strike, sustained by a combination of physical remoteness and total corporate dependency. The industrial peace ended in 1952 when a violent conflict resulted in the death of a miner. The mine closed in 1963. When it did, WIDEN had no infrastructure legacy that outlasted the company. No road network, no commercial district that had ever served anyone other than Bradley's workers, no connection to the broader Clay County economy. The isolation that had been a corporate tool left nothing behind when the tool was no longer needed. Today, the real estate listings in Clay County reflect that legacy. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in Prussias sits at $48,000. 46 acres in Ivydale lists at $64,900. The acreage is the draw here. Investors and homesteaders are increasingly looking at Clay County not as a place to restore what existed, but as a place to build something different. Off-grid systems, regenerative agriculture on old strip strip mine land, self-sufficient properties that treat the isolation as a feature rather than a deficiency. WIDEN is the entry point for a buyer who wants land and does not need proximity. The isolation that was once used as a corporate weapon is now, for a certain kind of buyer, exactly the point. Cass. Every other town on this list is a version of the same story. Industry built it, industry left. The town has been managing the aftermath ever since. Cass is the exception, and it is worth understanding why, because the reason Cass survived tells you exactly what is missing from every town that did not. Cass was a timber town, not a coal town. When its lumber industry collapsed in the mid-20th century, the West Virginia state government made a decision that almost never happens with these places. It intervened. The state purchased the town and its lumber railroad in the 1960s and converted them into a state park. Heritage tourism replaced extractive industry. The scenic railroad still runs. Snowshoe Ski Resort is nearby. The town has an economic identity that does not depend on a single corporation's continued interest. The real estate market in Cass reflects the difference. A 3-bedroom house here lists around $270,000. A ski-in ski-out studio condo at Snowshoe sits at $95,000. These prices are dramatically higher than anything in McDowell or Wyoming County, and the reason is straightforward. Preserved infrastructure plus a tourism identity creates demand. Demand creates a price floor. That floor did not exist in the southern coalfields because no equivalent intervention ever happened there. Cass is not on this list as a bargain. It is on this list as a proof of concept. If you are looking at a $15,000 house in a county with no grocery store, Cass is the answer to the question of what these places could look like if the trajectory had gone differently. It is also a reminder that the difference between a ghost town and a thriving small community is often a single decision made at the right moment by someone with the resources to act on it. Kimball. The national median home price in the United States is $420,000. In Kimball, West Virginia, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house with 1,226 square feet is listed at $7,000. That is not a foreclosure auction with a dozen complications buried in the title. That is a direct listing, $7,000. In a country where the average person cannot afford to buy an average home, there is a town where a house costs less than a transmission repair. Kimball sits in McDowell County, which once produced more coal than any other county in the country. The population contraction since the mines closed has been severe enough that basic demand for housing has essentially evaporated. There are no buyers competing for these properties because there are very few people left who want to live in a place with no nearby grocery store, compromised municipal water infrastructure, and no reliable broadband connection. The price reflects all of that honestly. There is one detail about Kimball that tends to get overlooked in the price shock conversation. The town is home to the Kimball World War I Memorial, the first monument in the United States dedicated to black veterans of that war. It is a piece of American history that exists in a town the economy has largely written off, maintained by a community that has held onto its identity despite everything that has pushed against it. The $7,000 house is the emotional center of this video. The gap between that number and $420,000 is not a glitch in the market. It is the compressed residue of a century-long industrial cycle that built an entire region, extracted everything it needed, and moved on. That gap is real. The catches attached to it are equally real. Anyone who understands both is in a position to make an actual decision. Stotesbury. Stotesbury was named after Edward T. Stotesbury, president of the Beaver Coal Company. At its peak in the 1930s, it had a social fabric strong enough to hold a real community together. Churches, schools, the particular density of daily life that forms when people live in close proximity around a shared purpose. The shared purpose was coal. When coal left, the community dispersed. What remains today is a collection of ruins and a handful of surviving houses, situated close enough to the town of Sophia that the area retains basic services, an important distinction from the more isolated southern counties. The Sophia-Stotesbury corridor is more stable than McDowell, and the listings reflect that relative stability. A 1-bedroom house on Virginia Street in Sophia, $31,900. A 2-bedroom on Tams Highway, $30,000. These are not the price shock numbers you get from Kimball. They are, by every national measure, still extraordinarily inexpensive for what they are. Stotesbury is where the drone footage shows ivy covering walls and the silence of a mine shaft cooling the air around collapsed foundations. It is the most atmospheric entry on this list. Less dramatic than Gary's scale, less emotionally charged than Kimball's price point, but somehow more evocative of the core story this video has been telling. An industry arrived. It built everything a town needs. It extracted what it came for. It left. And the buildings it constructed, which were never really owned by the people who lived in them, are still standing in various states of return to the hillside. Proximity to Sophia means a buyer here has grocery access, basic services, and a realistic infrastructure situation for a retiree drawn to solitude, mountain air, and the specific quiet of a place that once held a great deal of noise. Stotesbury is the most livable ghost town on this list. Here is what the evidence actually shows. Stripped of any romanticism about Appalachian resilience or hysteria about industrial collapse, West Virginia eliminated Social Security taxation entirely starting in 2026. The phase-out was already underway. 35% exempt in 2024, 65% in 2025, 100% by 2026. The state also offers an $8,000 senior deduction per person, a $20,000 homestead exemption for residents over 65, and a property tax rate sitting around 0.58%, among the lowest in the country. The cost of living runs 17% below the national average. The state is not accidentally cheap. It is legislatively positioning itself to attract retirees on fixed incomes who cannot stretch a Social Security check in Florida or Arizona. The Ascend West Virginia program is funding that same migration for remote workers, a relocation package worth over $20,000, including $12,000 in direct cash payments, offered to workers who commit to relocating to hubs like the Greenbrier Valley and the New River Gorge. Over 400 workers and families have already moved through it, and in the deeper southern coalfields, a quieter migration is happening without any program behind it. Homesteaders buying 46 acres in Clay County for $64,000. Investors picking up houses in McDowell for $40,000, putting in cosmetic work, and selling inside a year for $68,000 to $100,000. The margins are not the same as flipping in a major metro, but the percentage return is competitive, and the entry point is something that does not exist in most of the country anymore. The $7,000 house in Kimball is real, so is the flood risk in the hollow below it. So is the broadband gap at the end of the mountain road. So is the 25-mile drive to the nearest grocery store. The towns in this video are not bargains in spite of those catches. They are priced the way they are because of those catches. Anyone who buys into one of them knowing all of that is making a genuine choice about how they want to live. And that, more than any price comparison, is the actual story West Virginia is telling right now.